Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into a really important piece of academic work that looks at how our rural communities are handling the growing threat of disasters. What we're breaking down is a monograph titled The Implementation of the National Policy for Civil Protection and Defense in the Rural Communities of the Cimvalpi Municipalities. It's authored by Amon Cosmo Gurgel Moreira with guidance from his advisor, Carlos Eduardo Guilarducci Fonseca. This was completed just this year, 2024, as part of the specialization in public management and civil protection and defense at the prestigious Federal University of Juiz de Fora. So let's get right into what this study uncovered. And hey, right off the bat, if you think this kind of deep dive is important and deserves to be seen, please take a second to follow our channel, like this content, and share it. It honestly makes a huge difference in getting this knowledge out there. All right, let's look at what's at stake. To really grasp why this research matters, you have to start with this number. Get this, 287 billion reais. That's the estimated cost of environmental disasters to Brazil's agriculture and livestock sectors in just a single decade, from 2013 to 2022. That data comes from the National Confederation of Municipalities. It's a massive, nationwide figure, and it's exactly why we need to understand what's happening on the ground, at the local level. So here's our game plan for walking through this study. First, we'll talk about why this is such a relevant topic. Then we'll zoom in on the specific problem being investigated. After that, we'll dive into what the data actually revealed. Fourth, we'll look at the author's conclusions and recommendations. And finally, we'll discuss the bigger impact of this kind of knowledge. Okay, so first up, why is a study like this so critical right now? Well, it really pushes back against a common idea that environmental disasters are just natural events that happen to us. The research argues they're actually socially constructed. They're shaped by our decisions, like where we choose to build our homes, how we farm our land, and how we manage our territory. And that shift in thinking is everything, because it means that risk isn't something we just have to accept, it's something we can and absolutely should manage. So, to investigate this, the author didn't look at the whole country. Instead, they focused on a very specific region in Minas Gerais, a consortium of municipalities known as Cimvalpi. Think of this area as a perfect case study to see if the big national policies for disaster management are actually making a difference in the real world. And let's be clear, we're not talking about a small, quiet corner of the country. Cimvalpi is a public consortium made up of 46 different municipalities. It's home to more than 750,000 people. But what's really crucial for this study is that it's a major agricultural hub. The entire economy there is deeply connected to the land, which of course makes it incredibly vulnerable to environmental shocks like floods and droughts. Now check this out. This data, which comes from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, shows something really important about how this region is structured. The vast majority of these places, we're talking 37 out of the 46 municipalities, are small towns with fewer than 20,000 people. And that's a key detail, because smaller municipalities often have way fewer resources and a lot less technical know-how to deal with complex disaster risks. So all of this leads us to the central question the author wanted to answer. It basically asks, how are risk and disaster management actions actually being implemented in these rural communities? And what's the real economic fallout for their farms and livestock? It's a straightforward question, but finding the answer is what drives this entire piece of research. All right, let's get to the good stuff, the findings. The author went digging through official public data to see what the numbers could tell us about the true cost of disasters in this region, and, just as importantly, how local governments are or aren't responding. Using data from the federal government's own digital atlas of disasters, the research calculated that between 1991 and 2022, direct losses in agriculture alone within this one territory surpassed 42 million reais. Suddenly, that huge national number we saw earlier becomes a very real, very painful local problem. But that's not even the whole story. Over that same period, the livestock sector in the region lost even more, over 48 million reais. You add those together, and you're looking at a recorded economic hit of over 90 million reais to the rural economy here. And believe it or not, even that staggering number is just the tip of the iceberg. So with that kind of money on the line, how are these towns responding? This right here might be the single most important discovery in the study. The author found that a whopping 67.4%, that's more than 2/3 of them, provided zero public information about any civil defense actions in their rural areas. None. And the small fraction that did report something, Their actions were almost entirely reactive, meaning they focused on cleaning up after a disaster hits, not on preventing one from happening in the first place. And here's where the data problem becomes crystal clear. The author points out that the official records are missing huge pieces of the puzzle. For example, the massive impacts from infamous disasters like the 2015 Samarco Dam collapse in Mariana weren't even fully logged in the national system. What that means is that 90 million real figure we just saw isn't the whole story. It's almost certainly a major underestimate of the true economic damage. So, what on earth do we do with all this information? It's a pretty bleak picture. Well, let's turn to the author's conclusions and, more importantly, the recommendations for how we can build stronger, more resilient rural communities. Thankfully, the author provides a really clear roadmap. The recommendations boil down to a few key ideas. First, we have to fix the data problem by creating a single, transparent database and making sure different levels of government are actually talking to each other. But the biggest change needed is a shift in mindset, moving away from just managing disasters after they happen and towards proactively managing risk before it turns into a disaster. This means investing in things like stronger rural roads and, crucially, actually training local officials so they know how to use the national policies that are already on the books. There's a quote from the research that just perfectly sums up this whole philosophy. It says, "Enhancing the understanding of risks is fundamental, with a focus on prevention and mitigation." In other words, you can't manage a risk if you don't truly understand it. It's all about shifting our energy to what we do before the storm hits. So when you zoom out, what's the big takeaway here? This research isn't just a report card for one region. No, it's a powerful argument for why we need to strengthen the connection between academic science and the day-to-day work of public management, all to protect our most vulnerable communities. Ultimately, a work like this shows just how vital academic research is. It gives us the hard evidence we need to make our public policies better and to build real, lasting resilience. And honestly, it really reflects the university's commitment to training critical, ethical professionals who can use science to make a real contribution to society. Now, look, we've really just scratched the surface today. If you want to explore the full analysis, see all the detailed data, and get the complete picture, we strongly recommend you check out the original monograph. We've made it easy for you and put a link right in the description. And just one final important thing before we go. Please be aware that this material is an automated synthesis of that academic work, and it was generated with the support of artificial intelligence. That means the content you just saw could contain simplifications or maybe even some inaccuracies. For the complete, faithful, and most accurate version, please consult the original document at the link below. Thanks so much for joining us for this breakdown.